The graveyard of great creative ideas isn't filled with bad concepts. It's filled with brilliant ideas that got stuck somewhere between that initial spark and the final delivery. Today we're building a highway from your mind to the market, eliminating the bottlenecks that kill momentum and create sustaining systems that turn inspiration into results. Let's get into it. Taking creatives from chaos to clarity. Welcome to Creativity Made Easy, the podcast where we transform creative chaos into clarity. This is a podcast for all creatives, designers, photographers, writers, and all creative entrepreneurs who are seeking practical and actionable strategies to grow their creative business through efficiency. I'm your host, Dustin Peed, creative process coach and consultant, and I help creatives know themselves, their process, and their teams to create with efficiency as they scale together. Before we get into today's episode, I want to invite you to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you're listening to this podcast. That just helps get this content out even further to those like yourself who can benefit from it. And while you're at it, share it with someone else that you feel like could benefit from hearing this content. I would greatly appreciate that share. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the thumbs up to like it. It does the same thing, helps get the content out further. Subscribe and ring the bell so you're notified every time we drop new content, which is at least every single Thursday when this podcast comes out. I want to remind you, you can go to dustinpeed.com/free. That's DUSTINPEAD.com/free for any of my free resources, templates at your disposal, built specifically with you in mind. Go download those for yourself today. And lastly, you can follow me on social media, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, all those places at Dustin Peed, DUSTINPEAD. All right, let's get into today's episode. Maybe you're like me in this, but I feel like I have probably close to 100 amazing ideas every single day. Yet when it comes time to execute on them, I've learned over time, and I know myself enough, and I know my process well enough to execute on them consistently every single time. That's why I say at the top of the show, I help creatives know themselves first, and then their process, and then their team, so that you can execute consistently every single time. So in order to do that, the first thing you need to do is you need to map out your creative pipeline. There's a hidden journey from concept, hey, I have this idea, to completion, where creatives never seem to map that journey. And so because they don't map that journey, they get lost in navigation. They get lost in understanding what it's going to take to get them to the destination at the end, right? Thomas Edison said it brilliantly. We talk about it on here all the time, that genius, right? Someone who reaches the end is considered a genius. And genius is only 1% inspiration, 1% idea, but it's 99% perspiration. It's putting in the work to go from that concept, to go from that idea to completion. And the first step is you have to map it out. Now, experts say there's about 7 critical stages of going from concept to completion. First, it's the inspiration, right? It's hey, this would be neat. And then there's a concept around that idea. Like, this is what I think it could look like. And then they get into the development of it, right? And then they get into the approval. Is this working? Is it not? Is a review, right? And then after that, they get into the production mode. Now we're going to actually produce the thing that we developed out and designed in our mind. And then they deliver it, and then they review it, and it's a cycle over and over and over again. I simplified that with my 4D creative process that I've adapted from all sorts of creative processes over the years. My 4Ds are first to define it, right? We don't know how to solve the problem until we know what problem we're trying to solve, and that's what we're doing out here with all of our creativity. All of our art is trying to solve some sort of problem, right? So what is the problem? Define it is the first D. The second D is to dream about it. What could be possible to solve this problem, right? What could potentially solve this? What could potentially be the fix here, right? And then the third D is to design it, right? This is where we're the blueprints, if you will, of how we feel like we're going to actually take some of those ideas that we came up in the dream phase and design them and put them to work. And maybe some things that work within our budget and our time constraint. And now we have a fully packaged design of how we're going to do this. And then lastly, it's the work. The fourth D is develop. This is where we put all the defining, all the dreaming, all the designing to work. This is the 99%, right? Just develop part of the 4D creative process. But look, you have to audit your own current pipeline for bottlenecks and dead zones. Where in the process from concept to completion are you getting lost? Where are you getting stuck? Where does it feel like every time I get here, I just don't get any further? Or when I do get through it, finally, it's not as good as I hoped it would be in the beginning. Those are the bottlenecks. Those are your dead zones. You need to identify those as often as possible. There's a difference between necessary steps and bureaucratic bloat, right? We're not trying to overcomplicate here. Your processes and your systems should serve your creativity, not limit it. Say it again. Your processes and your systems should serve your creativity, not limit it. So try this out. This week, walk through the 4D creative process, right? How do we define things? How do we dream about things? How do we design things? And lastly, how do we develop things? And adopt that for your team and what works best for you. Redo the language. Every creative process is different because every creative is different. But the bulk idea of defining the problem, dreaming about what could be, designing the solution, and then developing the solution is pretty much the same across the board. I've just simplified it over the years. All right, so we've identified those bottlenecks from concept to completion. So let's work on eliminating those bottlenecks, right? And some of the most common bottlenecks are there's decision paralysis, right? In the concept development. When we start talking about the design phase, we get decision. Well, what it could be this, it could be that, it could be. We tend to over edit and over complicate. So what happens is we get decision paralysis and we stop right there and it kills it, right? There's also approval delays, right? The bureaucratic approval, right? I'm waiting on this person because they didn't understand that this was part of the process, and this person over here, they're not getting back to me because we didn't set up clear communication guidelines from the get-go, and that will delay the project and ultimately kill the momentum. Thirdly, there's resource allocation confusion. Well, I thought we had this much time and this much money to be able to do this, but in fact, we have a whole lot more, or we have a whole lot less, or it's coming from a different place that we didn't understand about, or this person's going to be involved, not these people, right? All that confusion is not the clarity that you need to go from chaos to clarity, right? To go from concept to completion. Fourthly, communication gaps between team members, right? Maybe there's some breakdown in communication. Oh, I didn't notate this properly for them when we were doing the handoff process, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. I didn't understand their motives. I questioned their authority over this project. All these different things are things that can bottleneck the concept to completion process. And lastly, quality control. Quality control can become a gridlock if you're not careful. And we're going to talk about how to use it in the right way here in just a little bit. But you need to identify, where do the ideas go to die in our process? At what point does it fall off the cliff? Where is the biggest speed bump for you and your team each time you create? Right? You can use different tools for this, different journaling tools throughout the process, the time and energy audit from Dan Martell that we use all the time here to find what the biggest time sucks are, the biggest drains of the time and the energy. And you'll start to kind of identify that cliff when it's out of your brain and out of the feeling around the team, and on a whiteboard or on a black and white piece of paper on a computer screen where you can say, yes, I see it right there. It dips right there. That's the point that we need to work on. Listen, sometimes you need to block out everything else and just sprint. Just sprint from concept to completion. It's the whole create quickly thing that I've talked about here on this show before, and a lot of me and my creative partners, we use this concept a lot when we can say, I'm going to set aside a half a day or a week to just focus on this one thing, and I'm going to sprint towards it. Now, I will say, Make this an exception, monthly, quarterly, not the rule. Don't make it this is how we do things all the time, because if you're constantly sprinting, then you're going to burn yourself out and your team. But in this concept of sprint, I want to introduce you to the sprint method developed by Knapp at Google Ventures, right? It's a 5-day framework that takes you from a complex problem, the define, right, what the problem is, to the tested solution, right? The solution has been tested, is proven in 1 week. It's a 5-day sprint. So on Monday, they map out the challenge. What are we trying to solve here, right? They spend a whole day identifying what the problem is they're trying to solve. On Tuesday, they sketch out possible solutions. This would be my dream phase, right? They spend a whole day sketching out different possible solutions from all different angles. On Wednesday, they decide which the strongest one is, right? That's probably the first half of my design part, is to take all those things and refine down to what actually is going to work the strongest. The other half of my design part they do on Thursday. That's where you prototype, right? And you kind of understand start to kind of put the pieces together of all the ideas that you've done so far. And then on Friday, you test it with real users. It's fast, it's structured, and incredibly effective. And what makes it powerful for creative teams is that it replaces the endless debate with action. There's no time for overthinking because you're sprinting right towards the action. And what we can learn from this is we can learn clarity. We can learn clarity through the concept to completion. We can go, you know what, that's not necessary to junk up the process right here. What we need is clarity, and doing these sprints occasionally will unlock that for you. So imagine applying this to your next big initiative. What could you unlock in just 5 days as you sprint towards the finish line? Again, the exception, not the rule, because you don't want to burn yourself out or your team. Next, I want to talk about decision making. There's a cost associated with creative indecision. The people that over edit, the people that can't make a decision and lead the team or lead the project forward, right? The cost is momentum, team morale, and market opportunity. When you spin in cycles, the downward spiral of indecision, it costs you and your team momentum. It costs everybody morale. They're like, man, we had such a good thing going, and now I don't know if we can ever finish it, right? That's a culture killer. And market opportunity. Other people are going to pass you by while you're sitting there overthinking. So don't overthink, just create. And in order to do that, there's a couple things I need you to think about. Number one, build some decision trees around common creative choices to help the project not stall out. So you've identified where the project stalls, okay? Now, are there some easy decision trees, right? If you don't know what a decision tree is, it's basically just a visual graphic or a graph, right, that says, is such and such true, yes or no? Okay, if it's yes, here's what you do. If it's no, here's what you do. And you follow that all the way down into completion, right? So build those easy decision trees for the common creative choices to help the project not stall out. These could be things like frequently asked questions. What questions do your team constantly come to you and ask? Build a decision tree for it. There are questions that you answer from your team and your client. About 80% of the questions that you answer from your team and from your client are pretty much the same questions every single time. So why don't you notate those down so you can go, here's the answers to the questions that you're probably going to have. Let's go ahead and get that out of the way right up front so that you understand clearly what we're doing. That's how you prevent the project from stalling out. And occasionally you just need to adopt the good enough to keep moving standard, right? This kills the perfection paralysis. Perfection will paralyze you and your team. And lastly, create a clear decision-making authority at each stage. So the define, the dream, the design, the develop. Who is the ultimate authority at each stage? Who is making that final decision? Let their voice be the loudest and call it out to keep the project moving from concept to completion. You can do this when you're using my do versus do framework, the DO versus DUE framework. You can set those decision deadlines that will create forward momentum. These decision deadlines will go, okay, I know this is coming, so we're going to go. And then you get to it. And when you get to those deadlines, it doesn't stop there. It propels you further down the process to go from concept to completion. So 3 things to consider when you need to make decisions. Number 1, does it solve the client's core problem? Go back to the why. Go back to the define. What is the problem that we're trying to solve here? Why are we doing this? Number 2, is it feasible within our constraints? This is kind of that design mode, right? Like, what are we doing here? Is what we're doing feasible? Is it within the budget? Is it within our timeline? Is it within our talent? Is it within our people that we have available to us, our contractors, our team members, right? And number 3, does it maintain our creative standards? Is how we're going to do this, does it maintain our creative standards? Because you don't want to sacrifice creative standards. And so many creative professionals do this. They get in a time crunch. They go, I had the concept, I had the momentum, and then I hit a dip, and I got to deliver it. It's DUE, right? I got to deliver it. So we sacrifice on our creative standards, right? Don't do that. When you can implement this decision framework, and you can implement understanding what parts are bottlenecking, you can start thinking about anticipating those so that you can maintain your creative standards all the way from concept to completion. Now, earlier I talked about how we were going to talk about handoffs, right? There's certain parts of the process where it hands off from this team to this team, to this team member to this team member, from client to creative team, from creative team back to client, to creative director, to art director. Like, there's all these different people that are involved, right? There's all these handoffs. We know from watching sports and football that a lot of error happens in handoff, right? That's why when you watch a quarterback and a running back so closely, you can see how much intention there is and how much careful approach there is to handing the ball off from quarterback to the running back. It's because there's the handoff crisis. This is where context and this is where games get lost and momentum dies, right? We don't get the first down. We don't get the touchdown. We don't get the victory because we didn't pay attention to the handoff. Right. And so the handoff is where context get lost and momentum dies for creative project. You need to go back to the beginning and utilize creative briefs, not just with your client, but for internal team transitions as well. And we covered this several episodes ago when we talked about briefings. You can go back and look at that. But essentially what we're saying is that you need to be able to clearly identify to your team members along the way, this is what we're doing. Remind them every step of the way. This is what we're doing. This is what we're doing. This is what we're doing, right? That's the context that they need in order to preserve that creativity throughout the entire pipeline from concept to completion. Future you, which I talk about often, about notating things to set future you up for success for the context of what you're doing when you get to it again, right? Future you is also future us. So understanding, what does my team member need to know when I hand this off to them so that they can pick it up and run with it all the way into the end zone, right? Lastly, build feedback loops that improve rather than derail ideas. And I think the best time for feedback loops is after a project, not during the project. They can be on one-on-ones, they can be in a team gathering, but don't stall your momentum by going, you know what? How does everybody feel this is going right in the middle of a project? Now, write it down so that you have real-time notes as to what's actually going on, so that when you do have those feedback loops at the end, you do have those evaluation times to sit down one-on-one or in a team after a project. You can look at it and go, hey, at this point, I wrote down this note. This is how I was feeling. This is what I was facing. This was the dilemma. How can we fix this so that next time we don't do it again? That is the mark of a great team and seamless handoff systems. Before we wrap up, I do want to talk about quality control. Now, quality control can accelerate or it can delay, but what we're going to focus on is quality assurance that happens throughout the process. Last episode, we talked about checklists, and that's exactly what we're talking about here. Building in these quality checkpoints that don't slow down production. You need to implement those feedback systems that improve ideas rather than just catching errors, right? Notate that stuff down, save it for afterwards, fix it, move it on, right? And train team members to self-quality control using your clear standards. Now, side note, if you don't have clear standards for what you're looking for from your team and what you're going to deliver to your client, then just stop listening to this episode right now. Go take a journal out into the middle of nowhere away from your screen and just write down what is it at the end of the day that are the standards for us that we want to hit every single time, and then communicate those over and over and over again to your team. And when you're sick of hearing yourself saying it, that's when they start to understand it. So just keep saying it, keep communicating those standards every step of the way. You can use templates, just like we talked about last week, to create project journey maps for your team that will include the quality touch points at each stage. So we talked about identifying the concept to completion, what that map looks like. When we hand off from one section to the next or one team member to the next, in that process, in that map, we're also going to say, this is the quality it needs to be at before we move on. This is the quality, this is the quality, this is the standard, this is the standard, every step of the way. So what do we do now? I want to give you 5 immediate actions to streamline your concept to completion pipeline. We already said all these already, but I'm just going to review them for you. Number 1, map your current journey. Just take a couple of hours documenting every step of the last 3 projects that took you from the initial concept to final delivery. This is not identifying your ideal journey. This is mapping your current journey. Because then number 2, what you're going to do is you're going to identify your biggest bottleneck from the mapping exercise. Number 1, you're going to pick one stage where projects consistently get stuck, and you're going to tackle that first before anything else. Then next, number 3, you're going to create decision deadlines. For your next project, I want you to set specific dates when key decisions must be made, regardless of whether you feel like it's ready or not, right? Those feelings can be elusive and they can be false, and they can hinder your momentum from concept to completion. Number 4, build a handoff template. Create a standard, again, going back to the templates from last week, create a standard document template that preserves context and creative intent when you're passing the work between team members. Remember, it's not just about future you, it's about future us as well. And then lastly, implement a weekly review of your pipeline. Just schedule 15, 10, 20, 30, not very long minutes every single Friday to review what's moving through your pipeline and what's getting stuck and where it's getting stuck at. I want to remind you of the resources that I talked about in this episode. There's a book called Sprint by Jake Knapp, that's Knapp, with Google Ventures, and talks about their sprint process. I also mentioned the 4D creative process. That is available at dustinpeed.com/free so that you can begin to implement that with you and your team immediately. Listen, the distance between your brilliant ideas and successful execution doesn't have to be measured in months, compromised by many committees. With the right pipeline, your creative work can move from your mind to the market with momentum intact and quality preserved. If you're ready to build your own concept to completion highway, head to dustinpeed.com for the free resources or get on my calendar for a free coaching session. I would love to coach you through this process specifically for you and your team. Hop on my calendar at dustinpeed.com. Click on the Let's Chat button. Reminder to follow me at Dustin Peed on all social media for daily insights and to keep your creative pipeline flowing. Next week, I have a very special guest, Blaine Hogan. Director Blaine Hogan is going to be in the house to talk about an article that he wrote called Execution is Everything. Oh, speak to my heart, Blaine. I can't wait to talk to you. And I can't wait to share that conversation with you next week on Creativity Made Easy. Have a great week.